exceptional.
Four Reds prospects have made their way into MLB Pipeline's top 100. We'll tell you who they are and what we think about it. Then we'll dive into Reds history and look at some statistics, and you know I love statistics, from some of the greatest Reds players of all time. And all of that's before taking your comments and questions on today's live Aloha Friday edition of the Locked On Reds podcast. Roll the intro, Jeffrey.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Reds with myself, Jeff Carr, and my co-host, Stephen Offenbaker. We are lifelong Cincinnati Reds fans that have turned an addiction to this team into information for you. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to us talk some Reds with you. We encourage you, if you're listening on the audio version of the podcast, hit us up on Twitter, or if you're watching us right here on the live edition of the podcast on YouTube, definitely jump into our comments section. Give us some questions. Give us some thoughts about the Reds, because talking Reds is what we do, and we want to talk Reds with you. Locked On Reds is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day, and on today's podcast, we want to talk about some Reds of the future, some Reds of the past, and take your questions and comments as well. We're going to start, though, Steve, with the Reds of the future, because the MLB Pipeline rankings came out here yesterday. They were released last night, and the Reds got 4 guys in the top 100, but I'm pretty sure we're going to see some more jump in there.
Yeah, well, and when you look at this list, Jeff, I mean, the number one player on this list, if you were surprised by this, you haven't been paying attention for the last couple of years, because, Elly De La Cruz being the leader of the Reds prospect group should come as a shock to nobody. What surprised me a little bit, though, is the number 10 ranking. Because I really thought he would have squeaked in just a little bit higher than that. I was kind of hoping to see him around the 5-6 range. And if for nothing else, for the fact that he has just come on out of nowhere. If you remember that there was a time when he was not on anybody's radar. He wasn't on anybody's list. When he really started going off in Daytona, people were calling around trying to find out who is this guy. And it would make sense to me for him to not be the 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4. But I think there's an argument for him to be the 5, 6, 7 prospect in baseball. 10 feels a little soft, is what I'm saying, Jeff.
No, I think I agree with you, and I think the reasoning for it, based on a lot of different stuff that I've read, because whether you're talking about Baseball America, whether you're talking about MLB Pipeline like we're looking at today, whether you're talking about FanGraphs, all of them, they all rate him as the top Reds prospect, and a lot of them are split as to where in the top 10 he ranks, but they all have him in the top 10. I think the biggest reason for MLB Pipeline's conservative ranking here is because a lot of folks believe that as high a ceiling as he has, he still also has kind of a low floor. They're not really sure what to expect from him. I think that you and I are both of the agreement that he's going to hit that ceiling and he's just going to keep going because he is uber talented. We've seen the results on the field. We know exactly what to expect from him once he gets called up. And I will note this too, on top of the conservative ranking, MLB Pipeline did something interesting because they have all of the different prospects and the levels that they're currently at. They have him listed at the MLB level.
Well, I think that that's a reasonable guess on their part. And I don't think that means they're projecting him to make the opening day roster, although I think that it's a possibility. We've talked about that. But the Reds are going to be very hard pressed to not have him up soon.
Yeah.
And he's gonna play a lot in 2023. So, while it says it and it's gonna happen, I don't think that means when you get your opening day ticket, you're gonna see Elly De La Cruz at shortstop.
Yeah, I would wonder, and it's interesting because a friend of the show, Crazy, and some other folks have been talking with me about this. If they do have him on the opening day roster and he finishes high on the Rookie of the Year list, the Reds get an extra draft pick for that. So there's a little bit of an incentive, especially in a year where I think the stated goal and the goal that everybody should understand is that they're trying to figure out what they have in guys on the roster. So they're going to be playing a lot of young guys. Are going to be playing some guys that need to prove it. And I think that he could really fit into the, okay, if we let him prove it, and he really does pan out as quickly as we hope he can, then he could benefit the Reds with an extra draft pick. So I'd be interested to see. I think that there's definitely, we always joke that, okay, well, yeah, the percentage chance is greater than 1, but we're not necessarily sure that it's much higher than that. I think that there's a pretty good shot he makes the opening day roster. So it's exciting to see all of the recognition that he has received from just about every minor league publication out there.
It is. And what's interesting with this list, Jeff, is a couple things I find super interesting, but the lack of pitching on this list is one of the things that really stood out to me because none of the up and coming arms are ranked. And I kind of like it that way. These pitchers like to have chips on their shoulders. I don't know if you've noticed that or not about these pitchers, but these pitchers like to have chips on their shoulders. And I think that will serve as a great motivator for a lot of these guys. If Williamson needed one more thing to be motivated about to make the rotation, here it is. If Stout needed one more thing to try to break through and get that, 4th or 5th spot in the rotation, here it is. If Chase Petty needed something, if Connor Phillips needed something, here it is. They're not ranked at all in the top 100. So I found that a little interesting, but the next guy on the list did not surprise me. And let's just get this out of your system already. For the YouTube viewers only, Jeff has a favorite clip that he likes to play. And for the audio listeners, when this guy does reach Cincinnati, you're going to be able to listen to the Reds on the radio and know who hit the home run from the sound because Jeff is ingraining it in your head. So without further ado, Mr. Noelvi Marte.
Ah, man, I can't wait to see that.
Noelvi Marte comes in at number 29 on MLB's Pipeline Top 100, Jeff. What do you think about the placement as far as that ranking goes? And are you surprised that he's the number 2 guy in the Red system?
I definitely think it's fair. It's interesting because I know that Baseball America really dropped him down their list. He was a top 20 guy in Baseball America before the trade. And this year, I think he's like in the 40s or the 50s. So Pipeline's a little bit higher on him in that regard. but I think that it's well warranted. I mean, the bat is amazing. And when you're talking about his plate discipline, it wasn't necessarily on display in Arizona, but the numbers don't show a free swinger who just misses a whole bunch. But when he happens to hit something, it goes that far. He is a pretty solid all-around hitter that just has a lot of power as well. So I'm very excited to see that. And I think that, we've talked about the fact that the Reds have already begun the process of moving him from shortstop to third base. They even list him on MLB Pipeline as a third baseman. I think Baseball America has him listed as a third baseman. People get it. Or actually, I take that back. MLB Pipeline still has him as shortstop. But anyway, I've seen him listed as a third base in other areas, and I think that is I'm going to be very excited to see how he continues to develop, because he's not a guy that I expect to be up early. If he is up, it's going to be probably August, maybe even September.
Yeah, I'm with Noelvi, I think it's a 2024 thing, actually. I would really be surprised to see him this year. Now, I mean, it'd be great if he plays his way into it, but I suspect that they're going to try and stagger these guys just as much as they can. And it would make sense to me that unless injuries force their hand somewhere along the way, that they would try and save back his debut for 2024. But with the ranking, I think that they've got this right as far as him being the second best position player prospect in the Reds organization right now. I agree with you. I think the Reds did the smart thing, which we don't get to say very often, in making a determination early. Okay, we've got to move guys. Everybody can't play shortstop. Somebody needs to be a third baseman. Guess what? It's you. And they just went in on that. And I think that that's great. I think it's great that Noelvi embraced it, didn't push back. And hopefully, his body type continues to develop. We got to remember when we talk about these young guys, what you see right now is not what you're going to get 5 years from now. These guys are still growing. They're young dudes that are going to bulk up more. In some cases, maybe get taller. And they're going to have to make adjustments to where they play and how they play. I had an interesting conversation with somebody within the Reds organization over the last week that, expressed some concern about this body type that the Reds have gone all in on. And I hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about it until this person who didn't give me permission to repeat, so I'm not going to identify, but this person, basically pointed out that when you're talking about a hitter like Elly De La Cruz, that's just absolutely enormous, playing at the major league level, you remember that, it's not a set strike zone as far as the size of the strike zone. The strike zone is based on your body from basically, the chest to the knees, right? To put it roughly. So in the case of Elly De La Cruz, that is a whole lot of territory to cover. That is a big space. And, I didn't put a lot of thought into that before, but, some of these prospects that haven't panned out within organizations have these huge body types, these huge strike zones. And when they face major league pitching, they can't cover it. So I think that is going to be a big test for guys like Elly De La Cruz, guys that continue to grow and get bigger, to be able to cover that much territory of a strike zone.
I think too, what I'm hearing, and I hope this happens, because Yankees fans complain to no end. You can ask our friend Stacey Gatsoulias over at Locked On Yankees, complained to no end about how umpires call Aaron Judge's low strike zone and how he's always getting strikes called in like the shins. But I would love to have that problem with Elly De La Cruz, where we're worried about the strike zone, because if we're worried about the strike zone, that means everything else is doing pretty well.
Well, let's blow through the rest of this list, Jeff. We could talk about Elly and Noelvi for probably the entire hour if we really run into. Number 3 on the list. And I'm really interested to get your take on this guy being the number 3 prospect in the Reds organization, and that is Edwin Arroyo. And, he's probably, of this list, the farthest away, pretty close to being the farthest away.
It's between him and Cam Collier. I think both of them are on the same time.
Are you surprised at how high everybody is on Edwin Arroyo right now? Because he's still kind of a long way off.
I think that I think that there's a bunch of different ways to rank prospects, and I think that me and you are of the same mind when we're looking at a prospect. In that one of the criteria we give them is how close are they to the major leagues. I don't necessarily think that's where scouts and where prospect prognosticators start to figure anything into. I think that they look at these guys and they look at the talent and they look at where they could be and they factor that in. There might be a little bit of how close they are to the major leagues, but I don't think they give it as much credence as guys like you and me do. However, this gets me excited because guys like Edwin Arroyo and Cam Collier are a little bit harder for me to get excited about because I know we're not going to see them for another 2, 3, maybe even 4 years in some cases, but they're telling us that when they're ready to go, it's going to be amazing. And specifically on Edwin Arroyo, he's a guy that when I read about and when I've seen some folks talk about him, and I know Doug has mentioned this as well, is that honestly, if you're rating the best shortstops in the Reds farm system, he rates as a better shortstop than Elly De La Cruz. And there's a possibility that down the road, whenever Arroyo is ready to go, that De La Cruz may move to third base or to the outfield or something like that so that they can put Arroyo at shortstop because all together, the package-wise, where you're talking about the glove and the bat, he has the best overall picture at shortstop, and whereas Elly De La Cruz could play anywhere on the field.
And we've gone crazy long on this segment, Jeff, but we got one more guy to talk about, so let's just kind of dig in. Let's dig in because the number 69 ranked prospect in MLB Pipeline's top 100 is your friend Cam Collier that you were just talking about.
There's something about making 69 jokes while wearing a Hawaiian shirt. I think I just got like a lot of energy. I don't know what it was.
We're gonna get canceled.
Well, when it comes to Cam
we're gonna
Collier,
get canceled. It's great.
When it comes to Cam Collier, though, like, I mean, all of the reports on him when the Reds drafted him, I was super impressed by the fact that, you know, he wanted to graduate early because he wanted to face stiffer competition before he was even thought about being drafted. So this dude has already got the highest of motors and the highest of like competitive drive that you've heard of with a rookie or with a prospect or something like that. And he's super intelligent too. Like he's got the baseline with which to fall back on that. When you're going to tell me about a different prospect and their journey through the minor leagues, and the biggest question that everybody always has is, how do they deal with struggles? How do they deal with their first failures? A guy like Cam Collier, I'm not worried about because he seems like that kind of dude that's just going to eat struggles for breakfast and he's going to turn it into just even more greatness. I'm very much looking forward to his journey through the minors. I can't wait till he gets to Dayton. Want to watch a ton of them when he's a Dragon. And then let's see where he gets in the major leagues because all signs point to this dude being, you know, whenever his number is called up on the, you know, official call up time in like 3 or 4 years, then he is just going to set the world on fire.
Well, Jeff, there's a lot of names not on this list, so here's hoping that some of them can play their way into the top 100 throughout the course of the 2023 baseball season. I'm talking to you, Matt McClain, CES. We hope you make an appearance. And then, of course, the pitchers I mentioned up top, Chase Petty, Connor Phillips, all those guys. Hopefully, Brandon Williamson and Levi Stout don't have to worry about it because they're playing at the major league level and the prospect rankings won't matter. Coming up, we've been talking about the Reds' future, but during a show prep earlier this week, Jeff and I went down a statistical rabbit hole that got us looking at some of the Reds' all-time greats, and we're going to talk about what we saw and what we found interesting coming up here in just a minute. But before we talk about that, we want to talk to you about the sponsor of today's podcast. We're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the #1 sportsbook in America. That's right, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers that join today can get started with $150 in free bets, guaranteed. When you place your first bet of $5, you place that $5 bet, you're going to get $150 dropped into your account. That's a pretty good deal. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/locked-on right now to get your $150 in free bets. FanDuel has all of your favorite bets, from the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same game parlay. FanDuel has this interesting future bet for the World Series. I know you heard Jeff talking about it yesterday. I wasn't on, and since I wasn't on, maybe you didn't listen to Jeff because you missed me. Just in case that's the truth. And I would tell you, listen to Jeff when I'm not here because we like that guy. But he talked about this really interesting bet, and I want to kind of dig back in on it because it's really not a bad deal. You can take a bet on the World Series, basically where you're going to bet that one of the two New York teams, the Mets or the Yankees, win the World Series. If you take that bet, the odds are plus 330. It's a pretty good deal. Now, you could also take the rest of the field, meaning you could take all of the other teams. That one's at negative 440. So you'd get a little bit of a payout. So it's kind of that bet's almost a gimme, but it's not a big gimme. But either way, you could win some money over at FanDuel. So I encourage you to check that out. You can check out the odds there and more on the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet on the Bengals to win the AFC Championship game. Hooday! And know that you're going to get $150 in free bets dropped right into your account. That's at FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And now that sports betting is legal in Ohio, Locked On has the perfect show to help new and seasoned gamblers. You can download and subscribe to the Locked On Bets podcast for daily picks and analysis. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Jeff, we talked about Reds future, and this feels like an episode of Scrooge that we're doing, Reds past, Reds future. God help us, there were no Reds present, really, that we wanted to dig into today. But let's talk about Reds past a little bit, because as we were prepping for a show earlier this week, I went down a statistical rabbit hole that made prep take like 7 hours before we could record a show. But there's a lot of interesting statistics, and digging through it really gave me, I guess, a little bit more of appreciation for a couple of guys. One of them being Tony Perez. I'm gonna put that out there right up front. That looking at Tony Perez's numbers, I've been the champion of please stop comparing Tony Perez to Joey Votto because it's not even close. I still believe that. However, I've always thought Tony Perez was a borderline Hall of Famer. If you use my one and only WAR criteria, Tony Perez just misses. But he did some amazing things in his career, and a lot of the Reds, especially in that big red machine era, did a lot of amazing things, a lot of statistical oddities, things that you wouldn't expect. And I thought it would be fun to kind of dig through some of them, Jeff. And one of the things that I'll start with is the fact that so many of the guys from that 70s Reds baseball played forever. I mean, they played a long time. If we want to say, I know he wasn't around for the World Series part of it, and he was more a 60s guy for the Reds, but you go back to Frank Robinson, who started playing for the Reds when he was 20 years old, and he played until he was 40. His final season was in Cleveland at age 40. You look at Pete Rose, first season, 1963 at age 22. His last season as a player, 1986 at age 45. Johnny Bench, played for the Reds from age 19 through age 35, and almost all of that was at catcher. He had his sternum opened up during the course of that thing. He had a lot of things happen to him, and still, as a catcher, to catch for that long, it's just really a statistical oddity. Joe Morgan, everybody loves Joe, right? He started playing baseball for Houston at the age of 19, and his final season occurred in 1984 at age 40. And then maybe the one again, Tony Perez. Here's a guy that just seemed to play and play and play and play and play. And he spent, 20 plus years in the big leagues, Jeff. These guys just had so much longevity. It boggles the mind. It's no wonder that their counting stats are like they were.
I think, and that's the key, and it's something we always talk about, especially when we try to compare Joey Votto to Reds greats, because, everyone's knee-jerk reaction is, well, of course he's not that great. He hadn't won a World Series or anything like that. It's like, well, there's a lot of different things that go into that. But when you're talking about these players, I don't think we see guys have these kind of long careers anymore. They get to a point in their career, the modern day baseball, they get a point into their career where they understand their effectiveness is not near as much as it used to be. And most of them decide to retire before that becomes an issue. And I'm not saying that that's what happened with these guys, because they were awesome. Like, and pointing out a guy that we don't typically talk about a lot on this show, but on the baseball field, like Pete Rose in 1985, just absolutely phenomenal with a 395 on base in 119 games. Like, I'd be it would be a far-fetched idea for you to tell me that even Miguel Cabrera nowadays having an on-base percentage near 400 if he still continued to play.
You pull out that 1985 season. That is one of the biggest statistical mind blowers when you're talking about a couple of these dudes, because you mentioned Pete Rose. He was 44 years old. That's also the season that he broke baseball's all-time hits record. So it's going to play a little bit into this next stat, but Pete Rose was an all-star in 1985 at age 44. Not to be outdone, though, Tony Perez in that same 1985 season, Jeff, he was not an all-star, but in 72 games played for the Reds in 1985, Tony Perez at age 43, his slash line, 328, 396, 470 at age 43.
72 games, you say? Sounds like he might have been a platoon player. I thought that was like a bad word.
Tony Perez is one that jumped out at me a lot, because this was when we were trying to decide, are we going to call him a third baseman? Are we going to call him a first baseman? What are we going to do? And we were rating third baseman because of Scott Rowland's Hall of Fame induction. And when I was looking at Tony Perez's, third base era, basically these guys all played for the Reds for so long that they all have positional eras. Pete Rose has positional eras. He played 6 different positions, something like that, 5 different positions. Tony Perez also has positional eras from third base to first base. During his third base era, which was earlier in his career, basically if you go from 1967 through 1970, he was a third baseman. In all 4 of those seasons, he received MVP votes. In all 4 of those seasons, he was an all-star at third base for the Reds. And most of you still will remember him as the first baseman of the Big Red Machine. And we'll get into the comments later. Everybody refers to him as being one of the most clutch hitters in Reds history. And I'll have some comments on that when we get there. But I mean, it's just, these stats are something else. And then swinging it back over to Pete Rose, Jeff, because you're right. We don't talk about him a lot, and for reasons. There are reasons we don't dig through this a lot. But, he just kind of went out and hit the ball. He led the league 4 different times in batting average, a couple different times in on-base percentage, but he just kind of went out and plugged away at it. His statistical leading wasn't always there. He led the league always in things like games played and at bats, but and several times in hits, because he was just plugging away at it. But he didn't just build massive amounts of stats. One thing I found interesting is for a stretch from 1974 through 1977, Pete Rose played in every single game for those 4 years. In fact, in 1974, he played in 163 games.
And he played in every playoff game too.
And he played in every playoff game. He also played in 163 games in Philadelphia in 1979. And I meant to reach out to our buddy Joe Luckup to find out how many players in baseball history have played in 163 games for multiple teams. That's something we got to circle back on. We got to follow up on that with Joe.
I feel like that's got to be a 1-of-1 stat. And there's another thing that he's 1-of-1. You mentioned the games played. Nobody is going to eclipse, at least in the Reds. It might be in Major League Baseball. I'm not sure who it could be, but on the Reds, he owns a statistic that will never be touched. 2,722 games played. You're just not going to beat that. I mean, Joey Votto when he after the 9th game that he plays this year, he will hit 2,000. But think about that. That means that he's still 722 games. He would literally have to play till he's 50 because, there'd be platooning. He wouldn't be playing every day. There'd be injuries, all this other stuff. Like, there's no chance. And Joey Votto, I look at this roster and you wonder, we talked about this before, is there ever going to be another career Red? Joey Votto's the only guy that I think the last guy that would have a shot to even come close to that. And like second place, Davey Concepcion, 2,488 games. Wasn't even close. You have to play so many more years to touch Pete Rose's games played record. And that's a stat too that Joey has talked about before. It's a stat that that Bronson Arroyo's talked about before, in that, time played, innings, games, all that other stuff. That's a statistic that they all hold in very high regard. And it's not something that we as fans talk about because, well, it's not sexy. Like, you played in the game. Great. That's fun. But for players, that statistic is so key. And that's a stat that will never be broken by a Cincinnati Reds player.
No, absolutely. These numbers are fun, and I encourage all you guys watching and listening today. I know the hot stove is pretty cold at this point, and if you're just looking for some fun, go dig through some of these historical numbers with the Reds. There's lots of great stories in there, lots of things to just confirm some of the things we've been told all of our lives. Frank Robinson was an old 30 when he was traded. Go look at that age 30 season, his first in Baltimore. And spoiler alert, he won the MVP.
Chip on your shoulder. There was no case that season that he was going to get that chip off of his shoulder.
Absolutely. So there's lots of fun in there. Joe Morgan's statistics while he was a Red. Most people probably don't realize that Joe Morgan played a majority of his career in Houston, but he's not associated with Houston at all. He's a Red, and that's because of 1975 and 1976. And you look at those numbers and they almost make your eyes pop out of your head. The stats are fun. I love the numbers, guys. I encourage you to go dig into them, check them out just a little bit. But Jeff, we're heading into my favorite part of the show now.
We could almost do an entire side show, just fun with numbers, Steve. Maybe we ought to check that out. Sounds like a Sesame Street.
We need content in the off season, buddy.
Exactly. But we have got answers. You have got questions. We might have answers. I don't know. Usually I have answers.
Oh, we'll have an answer.
We're going to see.
I don't know what it might be, but we'll have an answer.
Usually, maybe. Hey, you know what? I'm him. Anyway, we'll get to those questions and those comments coming up here in just a moment. Before we get to those, though, I want to let you know that you can follow us on Twitter. In between episodes, we're on Twitter, tweeting about baseball, tweeting about whatever. You can follow us at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs. You can follow Steve at S. Offenbaker with 2 Fs. And you can follow the show at Locked On Reds. If this is your first time watching us, thank you so much for joining in on this live edition. We have gone off the rails formatically, but that's okay. We're having fun talking about some Reds baseball. And I know we got some questions. I know we got some thoughts about this team, about the future, about the past, all this other stuff. Steve, what do we got?
So for our audio feed, we're going to take a few of these. We'll keep you looped in for a while. And then everybody remember, when we do wrap the audio version, don't go away. We will continue on with the Q&A, and that will show up in the audio feed as a bonus episode. Here on YouTube, we'll just keep plowing right on through. And I'm going to start right here with Will Lentry, because I agree with Will. My shirt is the bomb. It is my Houday Bengals Aloha shirt for the reigning and future AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals. Houday, thanks for noticing my shirt, and it's better than Jeff's. So there you go.
You need to give me one of them. I don't have a Bengals one. I don't have a Reds one. Yeah.
Oh, you got to get in on the orders, my friend. You got to get in on the orders. Austin B says, after Joey, who is the next Red to get into the Hall of Fame? Also, does Brandon Phillips get any votes next season? This one's kind of interesting because I think Joey Votto will be the last player to ever go into the Hall of Fame as a Cincinnati Red. I at least if this Castellini ownership group sticks around for a long time, if I have to make that determination now based on who owns this team now, then I'm telling you that I don't see another player going into the Hall of Fame as a Cincinnati Red as long as those guys are in place, because nobody's going to be around here long enough for the majority of their career to occur in Cincinnati. Now, listen, that's not an indictment of the plan, Jeff. I'm okay with the churn and burn and flip as long as it's kind of a la Tampa where we're just always winning with new people. I'm good with that. I don't need Hall of Famers.
I don't know that we'll have career Reds anymore, but I think we'll still have guys that play maybe 8, maybe 9, maybe even 10 years as a Red. So you still could make the argument, if they're good enough, that they could go into the Hall of Fame as a Red if they have a Hall of Fame career. The thing of that is, predicting that is just so hard because there's a couple of factors in play. You mentioned the Castellinis. Also, what happens in the voting trend? Because we have seen a little bit of a shift here recently, but we still have plenty of dudes that turn in blank ballots that leave off guys that are definitely worthy. I mean, you're not going to tell me that Andrew Jones is not a Hall of Famer. That guy's a Hall of Famer. He should be in. Todd Helton should be in the Hall of Fame. But we got dudes over here that are over on their weird soapboxes talking about stupid voting tactics that they have, leaving blank ballots. If that changes, it might become a little bit easier to predict the Hall of Fame. But until that changes, it's very, very hard, because you can say such and such. You can say Tyler Stevenson, begins to be a picture of health this year and just keeps it going for a decade and a half or something like that. Or Jonathan India just takes off, or maybe Elly De La Cruz has a Hall of Fame career. But it's so hard to predict at this point in all of their careers, let alone the factor of baseball writers and how people get into the Hall of Fame. It's so hard to say, which I guess probably as of right now, the answer is nobody.
Yeah. And to the second part of that, just very quickly, Brandon Phillips gets 0 votes for the Hall of Fame. He is a career 28.4.
He's a Reds Hall of Famer
player. He's a Reds Hall of Famer. Maybe if people can stop being mad at him. But
he's a Reds Hall of Famer. Bronson Arroyo is a Reds Hall of Famer, but I never expected those guys
Hall
to
of
get
Fame votes. Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I don't see that happening. But Reds Hall of Famer, I could get on board with that.
Oh yeah.
Here's one we haven't talked about in a long time, Jeff. Mike Singer, I hope I'm saying that right, checks in and asks, what are our opinions on a salary cap and what are the odds of having it happen in Major League Baseball? Mike thinks Major League Baseball is in dire need of a salary cap. You want to take this one first?
I think so. I agree with Mike that Major League Baseball definitely needs it. The battle is going to be a bloodbath. I mean, we're talking about, because this is fresh on my mind, we're talking about like X-Men versus Sentinels here. It's going to be a crazy bloodbath. There's going to be a year of a lockout if Major League Baseball is serious about instituting a salary cap. We will miss an entire year of baseball. I firmly predict that happening. However, I would say in the next decade or so, I think it happens. I think that they go through this battle because it has to happen. There's going to be because there's no way, Steve Cohen's don't grow on trees. You're not just going to have 30, or if they expand to 32 teams like Rob Manfred wants them to, you're not going to have 32 Steve Cohen. So you're not just going to have guys that throw money at everything. You're always going to have the teams like the Reds, like the Royals, like the Guardians. The Guardians are successful at it, but the Guardians don't pay people. They don't have a large payroll. You're always going to have those teams that are like that. So to combat both the top end and the bottom end, you're going to have to create a salary cap that also includes a salary floor. And the players union is just not going to go for that. They're going to be pulled kicking and screaming into that world.
Yeah, there's going to have to be a very significant carrot in order to get the players to approve that. And I'm not saying that it can't happen. I agree with you. You and I have talked about this. There will be a significant work stoppage before a cap is instituted.
Lockout, strike,
I think
whatever the word is.
Yeah, lockout, strike, whatever it might be. One piece that you hit on, I think, is a great component. I see Major League Baseball tying expansion into a salary cap because you're going to be creating more major league jobs, which the union wants. If that's the negotiation start, I think.
And more minor
creating
jobs.
more jobs, you create a floor, You maybe improve player retirement, pensions, healthcare, start adding to things that the players have been fighting for a long, long time. But the trade-off is going to have to be a salary cap. And it'll take a year or more. And hear me when I say or more of guys not getting paid before they'll agree to something like that. And even with the not getting paid, the carrot, the enticement is going to have to be something significant in order to get it to happen.
Because that's going to be a situation where the owners and the Major League Baseball main office and everybody involved in making the decision to move forward with that plan, they will understand the consequences, and they will understand that it will hurt in the short term. It'll hurt with the fans. It'll hurt with the players, with everybody that covers baseball and stuff like that. But I believe it'll be worth it, because at the end of the day, this sport is getting to the point where you can count, and not to give legitimacy to that stupid PowerPoint that Phil Castellini had, but there are 10 teams that are legit championship contenders. The rest are a coin flip, and maybe a lot less than that, because you're not flipping a coin on the Reds. You're not flipping a coin on the Nationals. You're not flipping a coin on the Royals. You're not flipping a coin on the Tigers. Those guys aren't even in it.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Jeff Carr and Phil Castellini are friends.
No.
They're in lockstep. They agree.
I'm not saying it.
Jeff wants to know where you're going to go. That's where we're at. Good God.
He was wrong for doing that.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just messing with you, my friend. I'm just messing with you. And that is where we're going to wrap up the audio feed. Thanks for making Locked On Reds your first listen. Now go make Lindsey Crosby and the MLB Prospects podcast your second listen. It's just like Locked On Reds. It's free and available on all podcasting platforms. Jeff and I will be right back in your feeds next week, keeping you locked on Reds every single day. All right. Let's get back into this Q&A. Hey, someone said they like your shirt too. Will said he likes your shirt too. He says we both dress like we're from Florida. Yeah, these shirts are pretty tacky.
You dress that way because you live in Hawaii. I dress that way because I wish I lived in Hawaii or Florida, for that matter. Maybe not. Maybe South Carolina over Florida. But yeah.
Calvin's talking for the YouTube. Now that we're just YouTube here, but I know this is going in the audio feed, but my book is always waving, guys, because there's a ceiling fan right above me here, and it gets hot with the light on and everything. So that's why the book is always waving. I gotta rearrange.
Page is very inspirational to him. The words on that, he's memorized it, right? Like, what are the
that
words?
Page, that's the signature page. That's I used to read Where the Sidewalk Ends to my kids when they were little, and that's an autographed copy of Where the Sidewalk Ends that Shel Silverstein signed. So that's the actual signature page flapping back there. But I need to figure a way to anchor that down better. At any rate, Mother Goose wants to know if we're concerned at all about the potential hit on revenue. And I think he means Bally Sports, right? Not Diamond Sports. If Bally Sports declares bankruptcy, this is actually great. And I actually wanted to do a show about this next week, and we'll probably circle back to it just so that, the point doesn't get lost in the length of this episode. But yeah, and I saw a great point online that could be a big factor in why payroll was slashed so drastically, because the regional sports network revenue is about $60 million short of where it was initially projected. And if you look at how much payroll the Reds cut heading into this season, it's about the same amount.
I also think that, tying this back into the question from Mike Sanger, I think this is the first step. This is not a significant step, but this is the first step to a salary cap, because there is a vast inequity between television revenues of, say, the Dodgers and the Reds. The Dodgers make like 5 times, even if Bally wasn't bankrupt, make like 5 times on their TV deal based on what the Reds make. So I think, and Major League Baseball hired, and I'm blanking on the guy's name, but they hired a guy, and his title is Director of Regional Sports Networks. I think we're moving toward at least the blackouts ending. And if not, a Major League Baseball controlled television like system. That almost sounds like
much more like the NHL model and the NFL model, that they have total control over everything, which is why they're on all the streamers. So, I think it'll be good for baseball and exposure for people getting to watch baseball, and people in Iowa not being blacked out for like 7 teams, and here in Hawaii every team between Seattle and San Diego is blacked out in Hawaii, and it just makes no darn sense. it just none at all. So I hope that that's the case. I really do. The other piece of it is, and I'm not going to bore you guys with a lot of economics talk, but just very quickly, it finally gives Major League Baseball a narrative that reinforces what they've been trying to sell us for years. They've been trying to cry poor for years, and then the report comes out. Major League Baseball sees a record $10.8 billion revenue. But now the headline, Major League Baseball and bankruptcy, is something that's going to be out there and
also, to be fair,
Bally,
Bally does broadcast NBA and NHL games as well. So it's not just Major League Baseball.
Well, yeah, but they're not going to talk about that. They're going to talk about, look, see, bankruptcy. We're poor. We need a salary cap. Bankruptcy. Poor. Help me. Buy some cabbage if you're Bob Castellini. Greg Hughes talking about Tony Perez. Tony Perez, one of the best clutch hitters ever. Okay. Kind of hard to, we can look at like how he does with runners in scoring position, but he played on a team where there were always runners in scoring position. If every time you bat, there's a guy on base, you're going to kind of be a leader in hitting with runners in scoring position. I don't know. Listen, I guess at the end of the day, I've seen almost every member of the Big Red Machine give an interview where they have said Tony Perez was the heart of the lineup and the clutch guy. And they've said all these things. So, who am I to dispute it? If Pete Rose and Joe Morgan and Johnny Bench all say that Tony Perez is the guy, Tony Perez is the guy.
Yeah. And I think it's a double-edged sword a little bit, because clutch hitting is one of those things that's easy to dispute because, well, there are certain guys that are at the plate whenever there's runners on base, but they also have to be good enough to be put into that position. Like Sparky's not just going to put Tony Perez in that spot to bring in the runs just willy-nilly. Like he earned it. He earned that spot. So there's a little bit of clutch hitting that I understand the argument. I don't go too crazy with clutch hitting, because here's a fun stat for you. Aaron Judge, he's good at hitting home runs, right? We know that. Last year, he hit a walk-off home run. That was his first walk-off home run. We're going to say that Aaron Judge isn't clutch?
You heard it here first. Jeff loves Phil, and Aaron Judge is not clutch. This is what we're learning today. You are very hot takey today. I don't know what's going on.
When you look at the clutch, when you look at clutch hitting, like there's so many ways to look at what clutch hitting is. And a lot of what we say is who's getting those hits in the ninth inning to take the lead at the last second. Aaron Judge isn't one of those guys, but that doesn't mean he ain't a good hitter, because he's a great hitter.
Debbie Brown. Hey, Debbie. She checks in and says she loved the way Joe Morgan would flap his elbow before he swings the bat. And I saw an interview, and I wish I could remember it completely, but he did that as a way to remind himself to kind of stay back and slow down, I think. If I remember the way that he talked about that interview, the interesting side effect, Debbie, is that there is a whole generation of little leaguers that batted that way. Anybody that was playing little league ball, like maybe basically high school and below at the time that Joe Morgan was hitting in 1975 and 1976, also had a bat flap.
I always remember those machinations that different hitters had, especially when I was growing up playing little league, because I would do like with Sean Casey, like readjusting your gloves 27 times before a pitch, or Nomar Garciaparra, the way he did that, or different, waving the bat like Gary Sheffield or something like that. And I just did it because I saw them doing it. I didn't know there was a reason that they did it. And then you learn, well, they literally worked that into the routine because otherwise they'd be way off. And it was just their way of getting back on time. And it was like, wow, okay, I get it now, because your coaches would always tell you, stop doing that crap. You don't know why you're doing it. And I'm like, yeah, I do. Gary Sheffield did it and he's really good, so I'm going to do it too. It's like, no, that's not it at all.
I'll take you a little farther back than Jeff was talking. When I was a kid, I remember a lot of guys trying to bat like Julio Franco with the bat all the way up, pointing with the head of the bat, pointing back at the pitcher. I don't know how anybody hit the ball like that. But speaking of Julio Franco, did you see him on Twitter about a week ago, taking reps in the batting cage, just mashing at age 50 something? I'm like, of course he was.
Guy was built the baseball.
By the way, still batting with the head of the bat pointed at the pitching machine.
I remember trying that, and I was like,
it was great.
It just seems like extra work to get set up and get ready and get locked and loaded. And you're just like, yeah, I didn't need help batting worse. I know that.
Greg Hughes makes a point. Rose played hard every game the Rose way. Pete Rose's successes come in from multiple directions. Obviously, statistically, Pete Rose had a lot of success. He was around a long time, and he hit the ball at the major league level, the highest level, for a long time, and managed to get 4,256 big league hits. Never going to be broken. That record will never be broken. But there's something to be said for this comment. Pete Rose played hard every game. This is Greg Hughes again. The Rose way. I think that, combined with the fact that he was a Cincinnati kid in Cincinnati, playing blue collar style, basically you could fully envision him cracking a beer at third base in between belly flops, that style, that Charlie Hustle moniker that he carried. I think all of those things formed the perfect storm to make Pete Rose one of the most popular players of that generation. Because let's face it, dude was never marketable, even before all the off-field stuff. He was not really this is not the guy you're going out to hire to be your spokesman on a lot of things.
Right.
He's not Hollywood pretty. He's not, that guy, but still the town loved him.
Yeah. And I always think that it's important to know, there was something he did to stay in shape. There's no way that he got off the field and just, started popping
beer curls,
hot dogs.
Curls,
yeah,
man.
I mean,
It's
the
24 packs are heavy.
Nobody ever talks
Jeff.
about that. Nobody ever talks about it. They never talk about what he did to stay in shape. And I just think that is something that should be shouted out too, because you don't just be durable. You can't just be indestructible. No, none of us are Superman out here. You got to do something to be that durable and do what he did, because you look at different players across sports like Dwayne Wade. Dwayne Wade got hurt a lot. He played super hard, and he run full on into the padding and stuff like that to save a ball out of bounds, but he still got hurt. Everybody gets hurt. And just the way that he was able to avoid any sort of just career altering injury throughout all of those amazing seasons that he put together is just phenomenal.
A lot of those guys, that's why I read all of those ages and links of careers. That whole generation, maybe guys were just tougher back then. I don't know. Here, I'm going to piss everybody off now, Jeff. Was everybody just tougher back then? Is that what it was? Where what was going on? I don't know.
Yeah.
Mark McWhorter. Hey, Mark. This is a good question, Jeff. Who will be the 2023 Cincinnati Reds team MVP?
I think it's going to be Jonathan India, because I'm really rolling with this fact that he played hurt for most of the year last year. I'm really rolling with the fact that, especially at the end of the season, just all of those injuries had compounded to the point that he was not, kind of talking about the whole durability thing. He was just not able to be at 100% at any day of the week past the end of July, maybe even before the Field of Dreams game when he had that compartment syndrome thing. So I think that overall he's going to be much more healthy this year. He's going to come into camp fully in shape, fully ready to go, and just absolutely killing it. I think that Jonathan India is going to be this team MVP.
I'm taking Tyler Stevenson. He's going to catch over 100 games. He's going to play in 140 or 150 games. He's going to hit 40 home runs, and he's going to be in the conversation for baseball's MVP, not just the Cincinnati Reds MVP. There is your hot take of the day.
I like it.
Jeffrey Morgan, do we think that the Reds would trade Joey Votto away? Do we think that he could be a Blue Jay? Joey has to want to be a Blue Jay. And at every turn, Joey has said he wants to be in Cincinnati. He doesn't want to go someplace else and win. He wants to win here. He wants to play his whole career in Cincinnati. And I think he means that, because I can't imagine at this point that somebody hasn't at least back channeled the idea to him about a trade and he shut it down. I just can't imagine at this point, this ownership group, the way they're trying to save money, as hot as Joey was in 2017, someone had to have floated that idea when Joey was so hot back then. I can't imagine it happening.
I think, and really one of two things is going to happen, because he's not going to retire. He's said that last year. He said like he's going to play, at least a couple more years. And I think one of two things is going to happen. They're going to announce close to the end of the season, or maybe after the season, that they've reached some sort of agreement that he stays in Cincinnati for another couple of years with some deferred salary and something like that. Or they let him walk, because there is no realm of reality where they just don't there's people not picketing in front of Great American Ballpark if we see a headline that says Joey Votto was traded for a bag of peanuts. Because let's be honest, that's probably what they get at this point. We're not talking about a franchise altering prospect or even a guy that's ready for the major leagues at this point. You're talking about another deal like we talked about with Tucker Barnhart, like they'll get another Nick Quintana. And it's like, no, like I get it. The whole idea would be to send him to somebody where he can compete with. But I think at this point, he has forced the Reds' hand to say, you're either going to keep me after my contract is done, or I'm going to become a free agent and go somewhere else. I am not getting traded. You are not. I am not being a headline of Joey Votto gets traded for absolutely nobody.
I agree. Mr. Juan has a two-parter here, Jeff, and we're going to circle back into the salary cap era here. Mr. Juan says, why do we need a salary cap? Let stupid owners make stupid decisions and learn from them. He goes on to say, the Indians and Rays prove all the time that you don't need a high payroll to be competitive in this league. Well, slow your roll there, Mr. Juan. Let's see what the New York Mets do this year. If the New York Mets go out and win 115, 120 games with what amounts to an all-star team, it's going to send a clear message. And that is that Steve Cohen's not messing around. He's going to spend $500 million a year, whatever it takes. Remember, the Mets luxury tax, just the luxury tax, is more than the Reds payroll. If the Mets go out there and just crush the world, and there's a strong possibility that they're going to go out there and crush the world, it sends a clear signal that no matter how much roster building you do via trade, following what the Reds are trying to do, what Tampa's been doing, what Cleveland's been doing, you can't beat that team. You can't beat a team that's going to field 9 all-stars at every, basically every position player is a potential all-star. A starting rotation that has 3 or 4 of the 5 guys that are considered all-star level arms, a bullpen that once you get into the bullpen is just as good as the starting pitchers. Eventually it becomes to a point that you just can't keep up with that. The Dodgers are trying to do it. The Mets are trying to do it. The Yankees have tinkered on the brink of it. It'd be interesting how, if George Steinbrenner was alive, how he would respond to Steve Cohen. I think we'd see the biggest baseball bidding war ever between the Mets and the Yankees as far as money goes, if that were the case. The Reds, the Major League Baseball needs a salary cap. It's at a tipping point right now, and I think that Cohen, and maybe this is Cohen's strategy, go all in, win a couple World Series, force the game to be changed a little bit, and, be a guy that goes down in history as the guy that, maybe ultimately saves baseball from itself.
I think so. And I think that the important thing to remember, and I'm curious to see how this plays out, because the Reds play the Mets the second week of May. And I think by that time, Elly De La Cruz is up here. But there is a scenario that could happen where you see a Jose Barrero, who's still trying to prove things, face Justin Verlander. And I think that matchup alone, the fact that you have that just gap in talent at what they do, Justin Verlander at the top of his game for so long, Jose Barrero just trying to figure it out, trying to stick on in the major leagues, and you've got those two guys facing each other, is the essence of everyone's issues with baseball. There are people that talk about, oh, the game takes too long. Oh, the game's too slow. None of those are the problem. The problem is not having a salary cap. And the reason why Major League Baseball has fallen in popularity, why it's the NFL and the NBA so far ahead of them, and why the NHL is catching up to them, and who knows, it might be neck and neck at this point, is because they have just such a huge gap between what a good team is and what a bad team is. There's not a scenario in the NFL. Like, I know that the Texans were bad last year, but I don't think anybody accused them of being a college team or being a minor league team.
No, they were in a lot of games.
Yeah, but that happens all the time in baseball. You can say this, and so many people say this is a quadruple A team. This is a triple A team, but they're playing at the major league level because they're allowed to not pay their players. They're allowed to not have a team payroll that even competes with the top of the league. And I think that needs to change. And it's not simply rewarding the teams that don't spend and choose to be bad. It is forcing them to compete a little bit, because imagine if you had to tell the Castellinis that, let's say a salary floor was like, I don't know, 110 million or something this year. The Reds payroll right now, not including deferred salaries, is like at 50 million. It is a ridiculous difference. And I think that it is absolutely the key problem with Major League Baseball at this time. And it's going to take a lot to address it, but they absolutely cannot turn a blind eye to it.
Was a rapid fire. A few of these. Johnny checks in just to say great show, fellas. Well, Johnny, great listening. We're glad you're here. We appreciate you watching. Debbie Brown corrects me, says they're blacked out on 4 teams. That's 4 too many in Iowa. We're just bonkers.
Twins, Brewers, Cubs, White Sox.
Probably. I think it's got to be more than that, right? Because the Cardinals have got to be blacked out there.
I would think so. Maybe the Royals.
Debbie, are you sure it's 4? Double check on that. I know it's a lot. Either way, it's
probably
a lot.
Depends at what point in Iowa. Like the only thing I can think of in Iowa is Des Moines.
Mark McWhorter was asking about Bally's offering a tier for no blackouts. And, you know, that's the blackouts thing is because it's regionalized. It's all separate. It's all regional. It's all these different small owned, team owned things. Right. To get rid of the blackouts, it has to be centralized. And that's where baseball is heading. That's where Major League Baseball is going. And I think what's going to happen if they put all of the regional sports network into bankruptcy, then I think Major League Baseball probably buys the rest of the shares they don't own. At pennies on the dollar out of bankruptcy, and then they own it all. I just something like that.
There's a
Major
couple
League Baseball
though,
has to centralize it.
Like I find it hard to believe, because like you have, I think it's the Giants that are NBC Sports Bay Area. I find it hard to believe NBC Sports regional stuff ever goes bankrupt. I don't think I think Root is Seattle Root Sports. I don't think they ever go bankrupt.
I think they're Root.
And then of course you have the Red Sox and the Yankees that own their own thing. So that's never going to go bankrupt too. You're going to have to create a world where they're okay with everything being centralized. And I think we're moving toward that direction, but yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all gets done, but it's going to happen.
All right. David Bias says he's hearing rumors of a trade. Jeff, what do you think here? Read this one for me.
I'd take that. It would depend. I don't know that I would trade any of our shortstops for him right now, because I think that'd be an overpay. If you listen to our Locked On Mariners guys, and if you read Mariners coverage, they're sort of on the fence about Jared Kelenic. And in fact, the way that they talk about Jared Kelenic is the way that we talked about Nick Senzel about a year ago. Not the way that we're talking about Nick Senzel now, but the way that we talked to him about a year ago, where I think Mariners fans are kind of on their last legs with Jared Kelenic. So I think to put one of our shortstops in the deal, we would need more than just Jared Kelenic. I think that you probably look at maybe, I don't know, trading like Rhys Hines or something for Jared Kelenic. That's probably where I'm at. And that might not be enough for Seattle to say yes, but there's not any of those shortstops, McLean, Arroyo, definitely not Elly De La Cruz, definitely not Noelvi Marte. I don't know. Maybe you go down to like Jose Torres or something and offer him, but I just don't see it.
Steve McCoy checks in with a fantasy statistic update. Lodolo going 22-6, Ashcraft going 20-10, and Green going 19-11. First off, interesting.
Who was the last
ranking,
20-win Reds pitcher?
Who was the last Reds 20-win?
Was Cueto healthy enough to do it?
Maybe. Did he
I
ever
think
win
it might have
20
been
games?
Cueto in 2015.
Maybe, yeah. I find it interesting the way that Stephen McCoy has these pitchers ranked.
The
with
20
Lodolo,
win question is a good question. I find it hard to believe. Like, we would have to be a much better team to see a 22-win pitcher. It is super hard to win 20 games, especially in the landscape of pitching that is today, where most teams are really looking after the fifth inning to see if they can get into their bullpen. And in some cases during the fifth inning, and you still have that rule that a pitcher has to throw 5 innings to be the pitcher of record. So I just don't know. I wonder, that's a good question. Maybe we'll dive into that next week, is who is the Reds' next 20-win pitcher, and we will consider all avenues as to how that could happen.
Yeah. I think 20 wins, much like some of the other statistics in baseball with, guys stealing 60, 70 bases, and some stats are just going away. They're not going to come back. And I think 20 win seasons are probably one of them. The way the pitchers are pitched now, I just don't see how it's possible, at least not with any consistency. Hayden Mayer says he thinks the salary floor is more important to have than a salary cap. Well, it's certainly going to be one of the requirements to get the players to agree to a salary cap.
Yeah, I think that the salary floor is something that the owners aren't necessarily happy about, but they understand it accompanies the salary cap. The salary floor is super important. Sorry, I was just looking up. I was right. It's Johnny Cueto, but it's in 2014. 2014, Johnny Cueto won 20 games. So he would be the last guy. But before then, I mean, you're definitely into the 90s. And, I think maybe even into the 80s. But still, yeah, back to the salary floor question. That's the key, I think, especially for us. Like, I definitely believe that teams like the Twins and the White Sox, I'm thinking of those mid-range teams that they're never worried about spending too little, but they are worried about the teams that spend way more than them. Those are the ones that'll be championing the salary cap. So I think that overall the players are going to want the floor, and frankly, I think the fans do too.
James Combs asks, do we think Davey Concepcion eventually makes the Hall of Fame? I don't know. I think maybe that window has closed. I think that's done. I think if it was going to happen, it would have happened already. I think they would have done it already.
You've got those. I mean, the whole reason Fred McGriff made it in is because they have those new eras committees where they're just like, okay, this era, that era, this era, and they're voting on the players specifically and it's not the same baseball writers. It's like made up of former players who played in that era. So there's a chance, but I don't necessarily think I think he may just be out of consideration at this point.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree with that.
Which sucks because, I mean, his career was fantastic.
Will Klein says if McLean, CES, Steer, or others were Dodgers or Yankees, they'd be in the top 100.
Yeah.
Hard to argue that logic.
Yeah, the Dodgers had 7 prospects in the top 100 for MLB Pipeline, and then I believe, well, this was positionally, but looking at the top 10 shortstops, they had Marcelo Mayer for the Red Sox, and they had Anthony Volpe for the Yankees ahead of Elly De La Cruz, which any person that watches baseball knows Elly De La Cruz has a much higher ceiling than both those guys. So it's a lot of pandering to those fan bases because they know that those fan bases are going to put that sort of thing on blast.
Andy Kistler asks if we have any suggestions for Nick Craw questions. I'm guessing this is a Caravan deal. Andy's going to be going out on the Caravan. I say ask Nick when he's going to do the Locked On Reds podcast. I feel like that's the question, Jeff.
Yeah, I think so.
That's the question I have for him anyway.
Because I feel like the other questions are kind of obvious, or he's already answered them. I think and he's not going to give names because as a team employee, you're not going to give names. But what I would really want to know is the comment that he made back in December of the idea about trading for a controllable outfield talent or prospects or something like that. Who does he have in mind? I don't necessarily know that he would go into great detail about that, but that's like the question on top of my mind because he said that, and there's really been no rumblings, which we know the Reds are not a rumor team. We're not going to hear rumblings about a move before a move happens, but it's a very easy comment to say if there is no specific target. And I feel like Nick Krall's not a guy who says things just to say things. I think that he had an idea in mind.
Let's do a couple more here, Jeff, and then we'll get out of here for the day. But, let me ask you this. With the Caravan, is it falling as flat as I'm reading that it's falling flat, or am I just reading it that way because I want to be right about all the things I had to say last week? Like, is it really as flat as it seems? I mean, like social media wise, I'm seeing some things, but definitely not like Reds Fest was. The timeline was just blowing up with Reds Fest stuff, both team produced and from the fans attending and going and being excited and all those things. I'm not really seeing a whole lot of that with the Caravan.
Well, no, and I wouldn't say that it's falling flat because of that. I think that there's an element of the Caravan that is meant to be self-contained to the places that they go because they see those communities as, and it's weird that, they go to Hamilton. It's not like Hamilton's that far from Cincinnati, but they go to these communities that are a little bit outside of Cincinnati and just trying to bring some sort of Reds to them. And while they may have failed when it comes to present day, star power, I know that the Reds don't have a lot of star power, but when you're talking about the top guys on the roster, none of them are on this trip. But I think that overall, not because it's been shared around a lot, does that mean that it's necessarily falling flat? Still seeing plenty of people going to the Caravan. And I think that it's encouraging, and it should show ownership that this fan base is begging for any amount of caring about making the playoffs here soon. And I talked about it yesterday that, the plan isn't necessarily to go all in 2023 because they're working like a 6-year plan, a 5 or 6 year plan here. And they're not necessarily at the point of contention, but I think they're close enough that, we can start to see some movement a little bit. So I want ownership to understand that this fan base is just so hungry for anything, and they continue to leave the plate clean.
Andy followed up in the comments. Yeah, he's going to the museum tomorrow at 3, and he thinks there's just not enough players out on the Caravan. Yeah, I agree with that. And even former guys,
put a lot into the Q&As and the former players. When they advertise, and I don't mean this. I'm not trying to disparage any one player, but when the guys that they advertised were Jose Barrero and Alejo Lopez, 2 guys that you're not even sure how much playing time they're going to get this year.
Yeah. And I'm taking credit for Chris Sabo being added to the
Caravan.
I don't know 100% for sure that that's true, but I'm taking the credit. I'm just going to say that was me and roll with it if everybody's all right with that, because he was added right after I did that whole rant last week. So I'm going to take it. Greg says, you got to win if you want fans to drive 4 or 5 hours. And that's true. But is it true? I think if the names were bigger, even on a bad team, the people that are going to the Caravans usually, in January, it's not the casual, I'm going to take in a Reds event kind of thing. It's usually the diehard guys. It's the hardcore. And yeah, that number would be up if they were, coming off of a playoff run or whatnot. But even for as bad as they are, there's a lot of excitement missing, I think.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff, I think that's it for the day. What do you think?
I like it. I think we hit a good point. I appreciate everybody for participating, for jumping into the comments section. Thanks for watching us here on this live Aloha edition of the Locked On Reds podcast. Steve, we got a lot for folks coming up next week. only a couple more weeks of, that truncated schedule. Week of February 13th, we're going to be back to 5 days a week because pitchers and catchers will be reporting then. I cannot wait.
Baseball is coming. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Reds. Thanks for making us your first listen, as always. I don't have the rundown in front of me. I don't know who we're promoting this time, Jeff, but I can tell you this. We're going to continue to be monitoring the transaction wires. We're going to keep looking for rumors. I think Nick Krall is going to be scouring what teams are doing. Even though he says they're done, they're not done. The roster is set. It's not really set. There's some stuff coming. It's just not going to be splashy. And Jeff and I are going to keep you locked on that and locked on Reds
every single day. But also, I was just thinking promotional wise, next week, Locked On Fantasy Baseball returns. That's right. For everybody that's a fantasy baseball fan, a fantasy baseball enthusiast, Locked On returns. It's Locked On Fantasy Baseball. You're going to love it. Matt and Dom are awesome. Got a lot of great insight. They've got their own website with rankings and all that other stuff. They're going to help you win your league. So you're not going to want to miss Locked On Fantasy Baseball starting up next Monday. Thanks, everybody.